Poland had the last round of its reforming electoral cycle, with General Wojciech Jaruzelski elected unopposed to the presidency. The Round Table deal had guaranteed that the Communist Party's candidate would become president, with extended powers, while the reformers, led by Solidarity, would nominate the Prime Minister, and anti-communist journalist Tadeusz Mazowiecki was duly appointed a few weeks later. Poland also reopened diplomatic relations with the Vatican, which had been broken off by the Holy See in 1945 when the Church refused to recognise the communist government. Over in Hungary, the government was dealing with an interesting conundrum. Lake Balaton, in the centre of the country, had been for decades a popular holiday destination for Eastern Bloc residents, particularly East Germans who were able to meet estranged family from West Germany there. However, since Hungary had dismantled the razor wire along its border with neutral but Western Austria earlier in the year, it was obvious that some East Germans were going on holiday, then slipping across the border and making their way to the West. Previously, the Hungarian government would have deported anyone caught back to East Germany in the tender mercies of the Stasi secret police, but there was a new reluctance to do that, so what to do with the Germans who didn't want to go home? There were elections in Iran, where Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani was elected as the fourth president of the Islamic Republic by 94.5% of the electorate, subordinate to the supreme leader Ali Khamenei. On the same day, the constitution was amended in a referendum to increase the size of the Assembly of Experts, who chose the supreme leader, and eliminate the post of prime minister. And also elections in Japan, where the ruling Liberal Democratic Party under Prime Minister Sosuke Uno took an absolute pasting. Still the largest party, but now one seat short of a majority and with an 11% swing away from them, as opposed to the Socialist Party's 17% increase in votes. Uno's involvement in a sex scandal had recently come to light, which can't have helped, and shortly after the election he resigned. Having only been in office since the start of June, his 68-day tenure was the shortest on record at the time. Meanwhile, in Italy, it was internal politics rather than an election that put Giulio Andreotti back in the Prime Minister's office for the third time after his predecessor, Ciriaco Di Mita, was brought down by his rivalry with the president, socialist Bettino Craxi. Andreotti, a Christian Democrat, had served 2 stints as PM in the 1970s, despite persistent rumours of involvement with the Cosa Nostra, and had also been foreign minister during a turbulent time, including negotiating with Yasser Arafat and the PLO during the Achille Lauro cruise liner hijacking in 1985. The first national park in the Netherlands was opened on Schiermonnikoog, a small and windswept island off the north coast with a population of just 950 or so, who nowadays are vastly outnumbered by the estimated 300,000 visitors a year, none of whom are allowed to bring their cars on the ferry over, so tourists mostly travel around by bicycle and electric bus. And Nintendo released their groundbreaking Game Boy portable game system in the US. A development of the Game & Watch series of portable games with LCD screens, the new unit had a dot matrix screen with much better graphical capabilities, and the innovative D-pad, developed after the designer, Gunpei Yokoi, realised that a traditional joystick would be prone to breaking and hinder its portability. While Nintendo of Japan had planned Super Mario Land to be the major title at launch, the killer app that made the Game Boy a massive hit came from an unusual source. Soviet-made puzzle game Tetris, with its addictive gameplay and catchy music based on a Russian folk song, was suggested by its US rights holder to appeal to all demographics, while he felt the Mario title would only appeal to boys. The Formula One circus arrived at the Hockenheimring with the pre-qualifying reshuffle complete. Brabham, Dallara and Rial would no longer need to pre-qualify either of their drivers, while LaRousse dropped into PQ, as did Tarquini for AGS and Moreno for Coloni. And there was one more move in the driver's merry-go-round, as Michele Alboreto now sat in the LaRousse Lola car, contemplating a move from Ferrari to pre-qualifying in just 6 months. Ironically, the Lolas were heavily Camel-sponsored, and Michele no longer seemed to be a Marlboro man. I've not been able to ascertain exactly whether Michele or Marlboro ended the relationship or whether they just came to an accommodation, so do drop a comment if you know more. Benetton, meanwhile, had a second new car available for Emanuele Pirro, who was actually proven very popular with the team for his excellent testing input and cheery personality, although there did seem to be some unsettling political manoeuvring going on at the parent company. Speaking of which, the BBC had a quick word with Tony Rudd, the new Lotus boss, after that team's management shake-up after Silverstone.
Oh, I think we're a little more enthusiastic, a bit more get up and go. I don't know, I've only had the job for 3 days. I can't tell you what it was like, but, you know, they're pretty cheerful now.
Now, there's all sorts of rumours surrounding the team at the moment. One of them is that two particular individuals are negotiating to take the team over. Golfer Greg Norman and Jackie Stewart, no less.
Well, they haven't spoken to me about it, and as you know, Jackie and I are old friends that go back a long while. He knows my telephone number, but certainly hasn't spoken to me.
The team seemed to be visibly happier and more relaxed than of late, though how long this would last would presumably depend on on-track results. But first it was time for pre-qualifying, and the Onyxes, still smarting from their failure to escape PQ thanks to the Minardi miracle at Silverstone, were first and second, with the Lolas taking the other two spots. Alboreto in his first time out, squeaking through by 1,000th of a second ahead of Dalmas's AGS. The new Eurobrun continued not being much of an improvement on the old one, and the Zaxpeeds were bottom of the pile, with an increasingly dispirited local Bernd Schneider slowest of all, only the second time all year that he'd been beaten by Suzuki. During Friday's first qualifying session, Senna hit a stone which unluckily trashed his under tray, and he would need to use the spare, but with only 3 cars with the new gearbox available in Germany, McLaren team manager Joe Ramirez intercepted the testing team on their way to Imola and redirected them to Hockenheim. None of which stopped Senna from going top of the timings on Friday, and nobody could touch him on Saturday, with Prost's best effort still nearly a second behind. Mansell was third, another 8 tenths off, then Berger 4 tenths behind Mansell. The Ferraris were at least looking a lot more reliable in practice, as were the Williamses with their new engine, though it still wasn't developing enough power and they could only manage row 3. Nannini and Pirro, in his best qualifying position to date, sandwiched Piquet, who seemed to have regained a spring in his step, in 8th, and Alesi finished off the top 10 with another good drive. Grouillard had a good session too, putting Ligier 11th, just ahead of Brundle, who'd had a mild bout of food poisoning on Saturday but still outqualified his teammate. The Marches and Arrowses were still struggling for straight line speed, and while Alio placed his Lola 15th, new teammate and 1985 winner Alboreto was last, and within a couple of tenths of being bumped off the grid altogether by Sala. Gasho also missed the cut in the Onyx alongside the 2 Real drivers, Dana slowest of all, nearly 7.5 seconds off pole, and Weidler ejected from the meeting for having a push start. So with both German teams and all 3 German drivers out, the ARD crew had a chat to Bernie to see if he could suggest how come a country with such major motor industry couldn't even make the F1 grid.
Well, I think it's about time the industry got behind a German team, made the team successful, and then worry about getting a German driver to drive the car. At the moment, everybody's concentrating on getting a team package with German drivers, and it's all too new to do the whole thing in one go.
ARD also caught up with Real owner Günther Schmidt during the race, and he seemed to echo some of Bernie's thoughts.
Es gab gestern viel Wirbel die Fahrerfrage. Wird es im nächsten Jahr auch deutsche Fahrer bei Real geben? Ich glaube nicht, dass wir nochmal deutsche Fahrer einsetzen. Wir haben zu viel Druck. Wir stehen zu sehr unter Druck. Wir können ruhiger und besser arbeiten, wenn wir ausländische Fahrer beschäftigen. Okay, danke, Günther Schmidt.
And the German commentator Helmut Müller noted afterwards that the team always seemed to do better when Schmidt wasn't actually at the track. There weren't even any German engines now that BMW and Porsche had withdrawn, though the latter were rumoured to be considering a comeback under its own name this time, possibly supplying Tyrrell or Onyx next year. But for now, the locals at the sold-out track would have to make do with cheering on Gerhard Berger, who at least spoke the same language, more or less, but who had still yet to finish a race in 1989. It was slim pickings for the Motormad nation, but hopefully they could at least enjoy an entertaining race in beautiful weather. So the cars lined up after the parade lap, and off they went, with Berger getting a great start and going round the outside of the McLarens, while Alio was nudged from behind and went slowing onto the grass, but kept it running and was able to rejoin. Berger's lead didn't last long, as Senna came blasting by before the first chicane, by which time it was Senna, Berger, Prost, Mansell, Boots and Pirro, Nannini, and a slow-starting Patrese down in 8th. Prost came past Berger too as they went into the Ost curve, and normal service was resumed, as Alboreto rolled to a stop with an electrical fault in the Lola, joining Grouillard, who'd already gone out when his gearbox shaft broke at the start. Over the first few laps, 2 intra-team battles developed as Prost sought a way past Senna and Mansell tried to get round Berger, and Caffey's engine gave up after just 2 laps. Further back and off camera, Nannini had made his way past both Pirot and Boutsen into 5th and set fastest lap as he headed off in pursuit of the top 4, and the Belgian now had Pirot climbing all over the back of him too, with Patrese hanging onto the back of both of them. Jonathan Palmer pulled in with a unique and rather unpleasant problem. His car had sprung a fuel leak on the parade lap and it was painfully soaking his back, so he came in on lap 3 to be sluiced down with a bucket of water as Prost and Senna continued going at it hammer and tongs. Boutsen was punted off by an over-enthusiastic Pirot off camera, and a couple of laps later his team leader was in with electrical problems, which ultimately proved unfixable. So Pirot now took over 5th behind the McLaren and Ferrari pairs. Stefan Johansson's Onyx dropped out with overheating on lap 9, making it 6 retirements as the race approached 1/4 distance, as both leading pairs had, after some initial probes, settled back for the long haul. Pirot was some 12 seconds behind Mansell in 5th, with Patrese 6th another 6 seconds behind him, and 22 seconds behind Senna, with Piquet and Alesi just outside the points. On lap 14, as the McLarens had stretched their lead over Berger to some 6 seconds, the apparently jinxed Austrian had his second big off of the year, as his left rear tyre blew out under braking for the chicane and was launched across the curbs, his disintegrating Ferrari just missing Mansell as it recrossed the track to end in a crumpled heap on the grass, its driver unhurt but cursing his luck and trying to work out what on earth just happened. So Mansell was 3rd and sole Ferrari representative once more, with Pirot 4th, Patrese 5th and Piquet 6th, as Senna came up to lap poor Jonathan Palmer, who was now struggling with a slipping throttle. On lap 18, Prost made a stop for tyres, but something went wrong on the getaway, and he lost an extra 10 seconds or so after the clock had stopped, which let Mansell through into 2nd until he came in for his own stop on the next lap. He too had a problem, the team releasing the jacks while the left front was still being attached, so he had to stop again and get that seen to before boiling out of the pits, now 4th. Patrese's stop went much better, but he was so far behind the leaders it didn't make much real difference, as Palmer's throttle gave up the unequal struggle and the good doctor pulled over. Senna was next in for a stop, and incredibly it went wrong again, leaving the Brazilian stationary for over 20 seconds and allowing Prost through into the lead. So once all that had shaken out as half-distance approached, Prost led Senna, with Mansell 3rd, Pirot 4th, Piquet 5th and Alesi 6th, until the Frenchman spun and stalled as he had at Silverstone, but was evidently deemed to be in a dangerous spot and was able to get a push start and keep going, while his countryman Philippe Alliot was less fortunate, an oil leak sending him into a spin combined with a lively fire, swiftly extinguished but leaving oil and extinguisher foam on the track. With the top places relatively static, the cameras lingered for a while on a 7-car train in 9th through 16th places, consisting of De Cesaris, Modena, Martini, Nakajima, Alesi, Chiva and Capelli. The Japanese driver was making progress, passing the Minardi and shaping up to take a look at the Brabham, as Prost was approaching the lot of them as he clocked off another fastest lap. Pirot had been running well in 4th until he had a spectacular off at the entrance to the stadium complex, ploughing straight on through the styrofoam barriers, one of which fetched him a blow on the head, and the bruised and dazed Italian was taken off to hospital for a checkup. Prost, meanwhile, had caught up to that queue of cars and passed Capelli and Modena, who'd slipped back towards the rest of the group, while Nakajima had made his way to the front of it, passing De Cesaris just as Prost arrived on the scene, while Senna was about 3.8 seconds behind, making his own way through the midfielders. Once they were both through, Senna went on the attack, setting a fastest lap of his own and lapping Warwick, who had made his way quietly up to 6th as a result of the various retirements, but Nakajima was 7th and gunning for that last point. Both Marches retired, Gugelmin with a gearbox failure after 28 laps, and Capelli with dud electrics after 32. The team's cheerful character was really being tested this season. Senna was still chipping away at Prost's lead, but he was running out of time, still just knocking a 10th or 2 a lap, with 10 laps to go. Both McLarens lapped Piquet, then Patrese, leaving only Mansell on the same lap, as Nakajima's good run came to an end when he overcooked it trying to pass Warwick and swapped ends from 7th place. Modena was next out, his Judd expiring after 37 laps of the 44. Thierry Boutsen had a chat with the ARD's pit lane reporter Michael Schmidt, and all the time Senna drew closer and closer to Prost. It was going to be close. He was now almost in Prost's tow with 5 laps to go. Senna continued pushing, desperately needing the 9 points from the win after his 4 DNFs on the trot, while Prost was equally keen to finish his 6-year stint at McLaren with a third world title and take that number 1 with him wherever it was he went. The pair passed a rolling Eddie Cheever, whose fuel system had packed up with just a couple of laps to go, and then suddenly Prost slowed, Senna pulling out and taking the lead. The number 2 McLaren had lost 6th gear and swiftly dropped back, leaving Senna to set one more fastest lap on the penultimate lap as he took the victory he needed to stay in the championship race, while a philosophical Prost spluttered home 18 seconds adrift but still well over a minute ahead of third-place Mansell. With Patrese, Piquet and Warwick taking the remainder of the points places, the top 6 were actually as they had been for much of the second half of the race, and indeed the top 4 had been 1st, 2nd, 3rd and 5th respectively on the grid. De Cesaris, Brundle, Martini, Alesi and Arnoux made up the remaining finishers, with a thoroughly dispirited Eddie Cheever classified 12th after completing enough of the race to count. Senna and Prost were of course both asked afterwards what they thought would have happened if Prost's gearbox hadn't broken. Prost said he was confident he could have kept Senna behind him. Senna diplomatically replied that he was just concentrating on those 9 vital points. So, Ayrton Senna closed the gap slightly to Prost in the championship table, with Mansell drawing equal with Patrese on points in 3rd place but ahead on wins, while another McLaren 1-2 put the team in a pretty unassailable looking 61-point lead over 2nd placed Williams. Next up was Hungary, a very different circuit and a very different challenge, and a country and political ferment too. Everyone, though, was pleased to hear that Emanuele Pirro was absolutely fine and had actually driven his own car home from the circuit.
What happened at the pit stops? Both were a little problem.
Yeah, the first pit stop, Alan made a mistake and released the brakes before we'd completed the pit stop, and with Ayrton, one of the mechanics was not sure that he'd fixed the wheel properly, and we checked. It was okay, but these things you have to be 100%. So we checked it, and I suppose the outcome really was, I think, quite positive. I think we penalised Ayrton very badly with the pit stop.